Meiosis is just splitting one cell into two. And before you even start mitosis, the DNA is doubled. But in mitosis, what happens is you've got that condensing of the DNA into chromosomes. And those chromosomes then are split apart, even though they're identical copies of each other. So it's kind of confusing. The terminology kind of gets a little bit confusing. So if this is one chromosome, well, this is also one chromosome. The reason why we say chromosome here, they're both the same chromosome, even though this is a copy of this, we're talking about the amount of DNA. So the information here, the info here, that's what we call a chromosome. And this is just one little tiny segment of your total DNA. The rest of your DNA is then split off into different chromosomes. And humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. So this is where it gets even more confusing. So 23 pairs. So what the heck does that mean? So here I'm drawing them as they're being replicated. Like, so there's all of these X's here. So if you've got 23 of these X's, so we can just say 1, 2, 3, 4, and it goes all the way down to 23. And the 23rd, everybody has one X at least. So 23 pairs of chromosomes. So these are this is a chromosome right here, and it's the same information right there. But what happens in humans is that we've got two varieties of the same chromosome. Okay, so this right here is another version of this number 1 chromosome, and it's doubled as well when you have mitosis. It's doubled as well. So it gets a little confusing here. So these chromosomes right next to each other, they're different versions. Of chromosome 1. And to be fully correct here, you'd have to say these are duplicated different versions. Already they've been duplicated because there's this and this. This is a copy of this. So these grays are absolutely identical. They're just double. It's like you just made a copy of itself. And then here's another version. It's not exactly the same as this. So this is here. They code for the same genes, but they might be slightly different traits. Like you notice that you get some traits from your mother and some traits from your father, and sometimes it's this weird kind of combination of the two. It's because you've got different versions of the same trait. So humans, they have 23 chromosomes, but they've got different versions of those chromosomes. They've got 2 versions of each chromosome. And here they've been the versions have been duplicated. Each of the versions has been duplicated. So if I want to make this just a little bit more clear, I'd draw it like this. Down to 23. Let's say this is a boy. So if this is a guy, it would have a chromosome that looks something like this, a Y. So this is the sex-determining chromosome. This would be an X, and that would be a Y. Let's just say that this is the maternal. This is from mom, and the red one's from dad. Dad's the only one that can give you this Y chromosome, but we'll get into that later. Anyway, in mitosis, all of these chromosomes, I've already drawn them as being duplicated. But if they exist in their normal state, then they're just kind of like this one side of it. This would be one side, one sliver, one sliver, one sliver. And all these would just be one sliver, one sliver, one sliver, one sliver. These chromosomes are all duplicated in this sense because they're going to be pulled apart. So these chromosomes right here, even though they're different versions, in mitosis, they're going to be lining up like this. They'll be lining up like this. So here's a version. They'll all be lining up. I'm not actually sure if it's like alternating every other one, but let's just pretend it is. They just be lining up like this all the way down the very end. So they're all lining up like this. all the way down. I'm not sure if this is a good question. Does it make a duplicate that looks like this? So each side gets a Y chromosome? I'm guessing it has to, right? It seems like that makes more sense. I have to look that one up. I'm not quite sure. We're never going to be asked about that, but I'm just curious what that one would look like if it's duplicated, that Y chromosome. Anyway, these are all lined up right in the middle of a cell. And so if you're going to draw a cell around this, I'll just draw a cell right here. Like in mitosis, this would be the cell membrane. These would all have their microtubules attached to them right at the kinetochore region on the chromosome, and then these would all be attached to the centromere over here and the centromere over on this side, and they would be pulled to opposite regions and they'd be split apart. So these would all be going this way, and this side would all be going this way. It would be just ripped right in part, and that way it preserves the amount of information. So since these are copies of each other, you don't really lose any information if you split the cell now. If this side goes over here and that goes over there, well, they're just copies of each other. So you're not really losing any information. So this is mitosis. That's the process of mitosis there. You don't lose any information. Okay? I hope that clears up some of the vocabulary issues, because this section is all about vocabulary being kind of confusing because of the word chromosome. It's weird that they don't have different names for these things, but that's just what they call them. I need to introduce one more little variation of this. So if they're different versions of the same chromosome, we can call that something else. We call that homologous chromosomes. So these two, let me spell that, homologous chromosomes. These two, this chromosome and that chromosome, they would be considered homologous chromosomes. They're different versions of the same chromosome. It's still chromosome 1. It's just that this version from mom and that version from dad, together they're called homologous chromosomes. They're very similar to each other. They're just different versions of the same chromosome. Okay. Right. So in mitosis, they line up like this, all on the same plate, and they split apart so they don't lose any information. But if you now go on to meiosis, meiosis is a little strange. This is meiosis. So I'm just going to erase this part right here. Oh, yes. So I'm just going to erase this right here. And now I'm going to show you a different way of these chromosomes lining up. Okay? So that was mitosis. They split apart that way. But now, these bizarre these homologous chromosomes, they line up in a different way. They line up like, perhaps like this. Maybe for chromosome 1, it looks like this. And chromosome 2, maybe mom's on that side. Chromosome 3, maybe mom's still on that side. Chromosome 4, maybe they're over there. It could be on either side. ... All those down, all the way down to 23, where maybe this is on this side. Okay, now I'll draw on dads. Dads line up right next to each other. They line up just like this, like holding hands. Okay, maybe dad goes on this side now. Dad can't be on the same side as mom. So that would be on this side over here. So this is meiosis. They line up right next to each other. They say homologous chromosomes line up right next to each other. Now, when they do that, sometimes a little arm of a chromosome from dad will overlap with an arm from a chromosome from mom and perhaps be switched around. So perhaps one of dad's arms gets placed on mom's arms. It's really weird how this happens. It's pretty cool too. So I'll just draw in a little gray piece over here so they get swapped. That happens. Okay? It's just a way of kind of like randomizing all your genetic information. Okay, so now since they line up like this, not above each other, but now next to each other. This is chromosome 1 right here. They line up right next to each other. These homologous chromosomes line up right next to each other. Because of that, the entire even the duplicated part, even that copy of itself, which now has a little piece of dad replacing a part of the copy, is now pulled to this side of the cell. So when the microtubules attach here to the kinetochore and they get pulled to opposite regions of the cell and the cell then divides, well then they don't have the homologous chromosome right next to it. It's being pulled to the other side. So since a version has been lost, half of the DNA is now over there because the version is, even though it's not exactly the same, it's just the duplicate, it's a different version of the chromosome. It's been pulled to the other side of the cell, so you don't have as much genetic information. You don't have both versions. Okay, so you lose information. In fact, you lose half of the information. So once this cell now has pinched off, and it's got all, and the nucleus then reforms around those chromosomes, and the chromosomes then expand, and they say decondense, and a nuclear membrane then surrounds it for meiosis. Then this cell right here is no longer got the full amount of information. It's called haploid. It's a haploid cell. Haploid. Same thing's true for this. So after meiosis 1, the first division here, this is just the first division. These X's come over here. They're now haploid. This is haploid as well. So you've got two cells that are now haploid. Before, when they had all the information together, it was called a diploid cell. But now it's no longer like that. It was a diploid, no mas. Okay. So now since these are haploid, they've lost half their information. They've lost the other version here. After this process, the cell then divides again. But this time it looks just like mitosis. So the cell divides again, but this time I'm just going to redraw this cell right here just real quickly. I'll draw it with all of the X's and so forth in the right colors. So now this cell, I'm just going to redraw it over here. Here's red, it's red, and there's a Y down below. All these. There's all the chromosomes. I'm just drawing a few of the chromosomes here just to give you the example. So there's an X here, there's an X here. Okay, so now this is the same cell. I'm just redrawing right here. They line up in the middle. These chromosomes line up in the middle. And they're pulled apart again. So now this side is pulled apart from this. But now, check this out. Oh, I forgot to draw the little gray part right here, because that was the crossover from the mom. Dad and mom, remember, they crossed over there? So they've got a little gray part right here. So now these are not exactly duplicates of each other. But now they split down this middle line, and these copies of each other, for the most part, some of them have crossed over, and now they're not exactly copies of each other, like this top chromosome here. They're pulled to opposite sides. And then, since they're pulled to opposite sides, they're just a single little strand right here. And when they get pulled to opposite sides, then they're called something special when the cell then divides and you have just half of this. Okay, let's have that. I'm almost out of time. Thinking about this Y chromosome must look like this, because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense. Anyway, okay, I digress. So these are now split into the separate cells again. This little strand right here is just going to stay over here in this cell. This little strand right here is going to stay in this cell. All these are going to stay in this cell, and then these sides are pulled apart into that cell. So then we're going to have, these are still haploid, okay? So they still have the same amount of information. They didn't lose any information from this division to that division. But now we call them a special name. Since they don't have duplicates of each other, we call these things now gametes. So that's a gamete, that's a gamete. And over here, since those have split off as well, there are gametes as well. So these gametes in men, they would be sperm cells. For women, they would be eggs. And if you combine a sperm with an egg, then you combine a haploid cell with another haploid cell, and you get a diploid cell, which would be it would be a fertilized egg. It would be a zygote. It would have all the genetic information that could make a human. So it would have 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes at that point. Okay, so I hope that made sense.